Hello again. I'm sure that we all know by now that the Russians are invading Ukraine, probably with the aim of installing a puppet government there, which will be a little more pro-Moscow than the present crowd running the country from Kiev. I am no fan of Vladimir Putin. Still less was I a fan of the Soviet Union before its collapse. But in this case, I feel that the Russian actions are justified, and I don't blame them a bit for what they're doing today. That might, I realise, need a little explanation. Until the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the end of the communist regimes, which took place like a row of dominoes falling, firstly in Eastern Europe and then following the abortive coup in Russia, in the Soviet Union itself. Before that, there were two great military blocs facing each other in Europe. These were, of course, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organisation, and the Warsaw Pact. This was the very heart of the Cold War in geopolitical terms, the division of Europe which became known as the Iron Curtain. In the west was NATO, which, in addition to the United States and Canada, consisted of Britain, France, Belgium, Norway, Portugal and so on, countries which actually face the North Atlantic. Opposing them were the Warsaw Pact, which, as well as the Soviet Union itself, was made up of Poland, East Germany, Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, Albania and Czechoslovakia. The Warsaw Pact was disbanded in 1991, and this was a golden opportunity for Europe to stop being the front line between America and Russia. Those countries could have simply remained independent and neutral, not belonging to any military grouping at all. Had that happened, I think that the Russians would have been perfectly happy. Like Finland, countries such as Romania could have been neutral militarily, and then NATO would still have been a good long way from Russia's borders. Instead, NATO saw this as a chance to expand east as fast as it could be. So all those former Soviet satellites began to be absorbed into a military alliance dominated by America. Poland, Romania, Bulgaria and Hungary all joined NATO. And as if that weren't enough, parts of the former Soviet Union itself, the Baltic nations of Lithuania, Estonia and Latvia also joined NATO. Now, this was very alarming to Russia because it found that instead of staying where it was and being glad to see Europe freed from confrontation, the West, as represented by NATO, wanted to bring their front line east to Russia itself. At the same time that this was happening, NATO began to engage in various military operations which were clearly not defensive in nature and had nothing whatsoever to do with the North Atlantic. Bombing Serbia and Libya, for instance, and taking part in the war in Iraq. Is Libya in the North Atlantic? Not really. So it is that Russia was encircled by a military alliance which was flexing its muscles and showing that it felt able to operate anywhere it pleased. North Africa, the Middle East, Eastern Europe. Why Turkey, Romania and Estonia, countries which were a long way from the Atlantic Ocean, feel that they should belong to such an alliance, is a bit of a mystery. Russia decided to draw the line at Ukraine, which is, after all, where the Russian people and Russian culture had its very origins, in the Rus of Kiev. Once Ukraine started playing kiss in the ring with NATO and asking to join, then that was a step too far for Russia. They were not about to have their own heartland belonging to an American-dominated military alliance. And let's face it, Ukraine is an awfully long way from the North Atlantic. It's a bit weird to think of them joining NATO. If we in the West had left well alone and not felt that we could stake a claim first to Eastern European countries and then to parts of Russia itself, or the former Soviet Union, or however you like to think of it, then this war would not have happened. If NATO had announced a few days ago that Ukraine would never join NATO, then that would have been enough. But no. NATO has all along hoped to have as a member of its alliance the territory where Russia itself had its origins. What a coup that would have been. Now that this expansionist policy has come unstuck in such a spectacular fashion, I really don't feel inclined to blame Russia. If we could only have left Eastern Europe alone after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Warsaw Pact, then none of this would have happened. As I said to begin with, I'm certainly no fan of Putin, and I was never a supporter of the Soviet Union at all. Quite the opposite. But in this particular case, I don't think we can lay the blame at Russia's door.